Hello all. Considering how badly free trade is discussed at the moment by conservatives, traditional liberals, new liberals and all the rest, I thought I should put together a quick video on how to formulate a coherent argument with actual reasons instead of the current typical "it's bad" or "it's good" rhetoric being touted, which at best means nothing and at worst is deceiving or just plain wrong. So, how to argue against free trade? Firstly, you can state that true free trade includes the free movement of labour, because without this it is not free trade. Labour is what the worker trades, and as the worker cannot move, there is a good chance that one group of workers, or potentially both, in different ways, are getting a raw deal. Of course, this is never really noted by those in power, as their labour can normally move more freely across borders and they are more concerned about the free movement of capital and goods in any case. The free movement of people in any free trade agreement is an important indicator because it would quickly expose imbalances in any regulations that support the worker. This includes environmental regulations, working health and safety regulations, wage regulations, etc. If you're not willing to let workers flow freely, then it is the best indicator that the free flow of goods is screwing someone over. The offshoring of dirty, dangerous work, or in other words, the export of pollution, disease, accidents and miserable working conditions makes a mockery of any regulations you may have at home. Also, in the long run, you can guarantee that almost anything that is actually made, goods, will end up being made overseas, as they could always make it cheaper if they can pollute freely, have a captive labour market where they can suppress the workers' rights, or have a demographic advantage where an excessive supply of workers who can't move keep wages low. Some will say the trade will always balance, as the seller gets your currency and must buy something for it in your country. But what they don't say is that this does not have to be goods. As long as the country has something to sell, it is good enough. And after they have bought all the land and businesses and then financed all of the debt for the gift of cheap products from overseas, well then, the party is really over, as the jobless locals wake up at a land owned by foreigners in debt to foreign entities. Now, how to argue for free trade. As you guess from the above, free trade without the free movement of labour is a bad idea. But at the same time, when you would allow the free movement of people, because of similar regulations and labour conditions, it is a good idea and works exactly as advertised. Geographic factors, resources, weather, access to power and land will always mean that certain areas have advantages to produce specific things, and these should be allowed to dictate the type of production. There is no use growing bananas in Britain or having an iron smelter in the Canary Islands, for example. Subsidies and tariffs only lead to distorted markets, and in the end, more expensive products for the consumer and lower overall productivity. It should be reminded that when these ideas were first championed, trade barriers were endemic and more localized between states of a similar development level. Also, the free movement of labor at the time was a totally different world compared to today. So, for similar developed countries that could allow the free movement of labor, free trade is a boon. I will now quickly discuss two more components. One is strategic industries and the other is trade across zones of different development levels, without a free trade agreement. Firstly, trade across the development zones. Some will argue that trade imbalances are a way of pulling up the developing world by allowing them to slave away in misery for trinket wages to sell goods to the more developed world and thus increase the capital. This system is ripe for abuse and leads to the instability and misery we see today, not to mention massive environmental damage. Investment of capital in terms of capital goods, not consumer goods, in these regions is indeed desired so that production, and therefore development, can increase locally. No matter what the system of trade is, there will always be a level of abuse, but a good rule of thumb is that any goods sent to the developing country should be capital goods that cannot yet be produced locally. Tools, machine tools, education, knowledge, services, and not consumer goods, food, most clothes, locally available building materials, etc., where an equivalent utility can be produced locally. This would lead to increased local production, where potential lies, and increase the local development. Tropical islands living from tourists or other places without the ability to conceivably produce a local equivalent would naturally be exempt from this. For the others, the resources sold by the developing country, if at all, for these goods cannot be traded against cash or precious metals, but only vouchers redeemable in the goods mentioned above. The removal of cash transfer, while decreasing ease of transactions, will greatly reduce corruption, easily outweighing any inefficiency caused by the extra level of bureaucracy. Let me make this clear. Corruption is the biggest retarder to development. Throughout time and in every level of development, corruption represents the biggest brake on human development. On to strategic industries, be it military or commercial. Many bring this up as an argument for tariffs and subsidies. Logical-wise, this is only one step further than strategic resources. If you don't have them, having the industries won't help you in a time of reduced trade. You're always better off producing what is geographically advantageous. Conflict within a free trade group would be highly unlikely, if this includes the free movement of people. So claiming the need for military strategic industries is dubious at best. Things like manufacturing for less geographically tied industries will in the end be dictated by populations. As long as the infrastructure network is favourable, the decentralization of industry and services will be dictated by the will of the worker and the employer, with the encouragement of the government by supplying infrastructure. Lower company taxes, better living conditions for the worker despite lower wages, due to lower living expenses, should be the driving force for decentralization of industry within the free trade zone. Well, there you go. I hope this has brought some interesting points to light for those arguing for and against free trade, so that the argument of where and when free trade is bad and where it is good can be a bit more coherent and less whitewashed. All the best until next time.